Imagine an empire on the brink of destruction. Rome, the city that once seemed indestructible, was on its knees before a single man, Hannibal. For years, the Romans watched helplessly as their legions were crushed one after another. No general seemed capable of stopping the greatest military strategist of his era. No one, until a young commander emerged with unprecedented audacity. His name was Publius Cornelius Scipio, a man who dared to challenge the legend of Hannibal and rewrite Rome's destiny. But Scipio's story is not just about a battle. It is a tale of glory, betrayal, and injustice. He saved Rome from its greatest enemy and led it to the pinnacle of power. And what was his reward? Oblivion and humiliation. What did Scipio do to defeat a genius like Hannibal? And why, even after his greatest victory, was he persecuted and exiled? The answers to these questions will surprise you. What you are about to discover is one of history's greatest betrayals. To understand Scipio Africanus, we must go back to the beginning. He was born in 236 BC in Rome, into one of the Republic's most influential families, the gens Cornelia. From birth, his destiny was set. He was the heir to a lineage of generals and senators, men who shaped the course of Rome. His father, Publius Cornelius Scipio, was a seasoned and respected warrior, and it was under his shadow that young Scipio grew up, listening to tales of battles, military tactics, and the eternal rivalry with Carthage. But Scipio's youth was not marked solely by speeches and studies. He grew up during the darkest period in Rome's history, the Second Punic War. From an early age, he witnessed the terror that the name Hannibal Barca inspired. The reports were devastating. In 218 BC, Hannibal crossed the Alps with an army of mercenaries and war elephants, descending upon Italy like a storm. Roman generals tried to stop him, but they were annihilated. Rome was in panic. It was in this chaotic scenario that Scipio, still a teenager, saw his world collapse. His father was sent to Hispania to cut off Carthaginian supplies, but was ambushed and killed in battle. For many, the loss of a father would have been the end. For Scipio, it was the beginning. That young Roman aristocrat, who could have chosen a life of comfort in the Senate, made a decision that would change history. He swore vengeance. But what no one expected was that this young man would become the only one capable of defeating Rome's greatest enemy. As Rome staggered under the Carthaginian threat, he realized that the city needed more than mere resistance. It needed a leader capable of changing the course of the war. And that was exactly what he decided to become. The decision shocked the Senate. He was too young, too inexperienced. How could he lead a war that had already consumed Rome's finest generals? But Scipio was no ordinary soldier. In 211 BC, he was appointed quaestor, marking the beginning of his political and military career. The following year, in 210 BC, he was given the mission of commanding the legions in Hispania. Unlike previous Roman generals who had failed by underestimating the Carthaginians, Scipio studied every detail of the enemy. He understood that winning the war required more than just defeating armies on the battlefield. It was also necessary to cut the root of Carthaginian power in the region. His target was ambitious: New Carthage, modern-day Cartagena, Spain. This city was Carthage's most important base in Hispania, a hub of supplies, arsenals, and wealth. But capturing it seemed impossible. Fortified, surrounded by the sea, and well defended, no Roman army had ever dared to attack it directly. In 209 BC, Scipio led a bold and unexpected assault. In a stroke of genius, he used the very geography of the city against the Carthaginians. New Carthage was located between the sea and a lagoon, which appeared to be a natural barrier. But Scipio discovered that the lagoon's tide receded at certain hours of the day, creating a dry path leading up to the walls. While his main force launched a frontal assault to distract the defenders, A group of soldiers crossed the lagoon from its most vulnerable side, taking the city from the inside out. The result? Total victory. With the fall of New Carthage, Scipio captured one of the most strategic cities of the war, delivering an irreversible blow to Hannibal. The very supply base that had sustained the Carthaginian army in Italy was now in Roman hands. Scipio had turned the tide of the war, and this was only his first major victory. The young general was beginning to become a legend. He knew that Rome could no longer afford to simply react. For over a decade, Hannibal had ravaged Italy, defeating army after army and keeping the Republic in a constant state of despair. But now, with his supply lines cut off and Scipio holding the initiative, the game had changed. Instead of continuing to fight on Roman soil, Scipio made a bold decision to take the war directly to the heart of Carthage. If the Carthaginians wanted to reclaim their dominance, they would have to face Rome on their own land. It was a daring and extremely risky strategy. Many in the Senate hesitated. Sending an army to Africa meant leaving Italy vulnerable if something went wrong. But Scipio knew that this was the only way to destroy Carthage once and for all. In 204 BC, he landed in Africa. With a well-trained army and a bold plan, Scipio launched a blitzkrieg-style campaign. He attacked Carthaginian cities, devastated crops, and directly challenged Carthage's power. The effect was immediate. The Carthaginian Senate panicked. With no alternatives left, Carthage made its final, desperate decision. They recalled their greatest warrior. Hannibal, the strategist who had terrorized Rome for nearly 2 decades, returned to his homeland to fight his final battle. But this time, he was not in enemy territory. He was fighting for the survival of his own city. On the other side, Scipio Africanus was already waiting. He was no longer just a bold young commander. He was the man who had changed the course of the war and was now about to face Hannibal in open battle for the first time. The clash between the two greatest generals of the era had become inevitable. Rome and Carthage marched toward their decisive confrontation. The plains of Zama, in North Africa, would be the stage for the final battle. On one side stood Hannibal, the master of war, with his army of battle-hardened veterans and his last reserves of war elephants. On the other, Scipio prepared himself, determined to prove that Rome would not fall. The battle began with a thunderous charge. The Carthaginian elephants stormed forward, charging at the Roman lines. But Scipio had anticipated this move. He had trained his legionaries to open corridors at the moment of impact, allowing the elephants to pass through without inflicting damage. The tactic worked perfectly, dismantling Hannibal's initial assault and frustrating his advance. The key to the battle, however, was not the elephants, but the cavalry. Scipio had secured an alliance with the Numidians, the best cavalrymen of the time. These agile and fierce warriors knew exactly how to counter the Carthaginian horsemen. At the critical moment, they attacked from the flanks, breaking the enemy formation. With his cavalry gone, Hannibal's army was exposed and vulnerable. Rome had suffered massacres at Hannibal's hands, but now it was Scipio's turn for vengeance. The Roman legions advanced relentlessly, pushing the Carthaginians into the center of the battlefield. The once invincible army of Hannibal crumbled under Scipio's superior discipline and strategy. By the end of the day, Carthage was utterly defeated. After Zama, Carthage was forced to sign a humiliating peace treaty. It lost its territories, its fleet, and its influence. The Second Punic War was over. Scipio had done the impossible. He had not only defeated Hannibal, but he had ensured that Rome would rise as the dominant power of the Mediterranean. As a reward, he was given the title Africanus, a name that would eternalize his victory. Scipio Africanus returned to Rome as the greatest hero of his generation. He had done what no other commander had even dared to dream: defeated Hannibal, saved Rome, and secured its supremacy over the Mediterranean. His name was revered, his victory celebrated, and his prestige seemed untouchable. But Rome was a treacherous place, and the greater a man became, the greater the envy he inspired. In 199 BC, Scipio was elected consul, the highest office of the Republic. His status was no longer just that of a military commander, but also a political leader. And, as always, he was not afraid to make bold decisions. However, his independence and influence began to alarm the Senate. To many senators, Scipio was too powerful. He represented something that the Roman elite feared, a man whose individual glory threatened the Senate's collective authority. Tensions escalated when a new debate began to consume Rome: the fate of Carthage. For many Roman politicians, the complete destruction of Carthage was the only option. They did not just want victory, they wanted revenge. They wanted to erase Carthage from the map forever. But Scipio disagreed. He believed that Carthage had already been defeated. Destroying it completely would be a mistake. To Scipio, Carthage was no longer a military threat. It was now an important piece in the balance of power in the Mediterranean. A submissive but still existing Carthage could serve Rome's interests, preventing other nations from taking its place. But this vision did not sit well with many senators, especially a faction led by Cato the Elder. He saw Carthage as an open wound that could only be healed through total annihilation. Scipio, however, refused to support this massacre, and that was when his enemies found a way to bring him down. He did not know it yet, but Rome's elite was already preparing his downfall. The man who had saved Rome was now becoming an enemy within his own city. In 187 BC, Scipio was formally accused of corruption. His enemies claimed that, during the war against Carthage, he had embezzled money and personally profited from war spoils. But there was one problem: there was no real evidence. It was a baseless accusation, fueled purely by political rivalry and resentment. His enemies did not need proof, they only needed to tarnish his reputation. Faced with this injustice, Scipio could have defended himself. He could have used his influence, rallied his allies, and challenged the Senate. But he refused. Instead of pleading for his innocence, Scipio mocked the accusations. He would not give his enemies the satisfaction of seeing him beg. During the trial, he lifted his gaze to the senators and, with the same unshakable resolve he had shown on the battlefield, he asked, "On the day I celebrated my triumph, Rome called me a hero. And now, the same Rome wants to judge me as a criminal? Is this the reward for saving the city?" Silence filled the chamber. His accusers had no response. Everyone present knew the truth. Rome owed its existence to Scipio Africanus. But Scipio no longer wanted to be part of this farce. Feeling betrayed, humiliated, and disgusted with Roman politics, he abandoned public life. Without looking back, he left the city and retired to the countryside, where he would spend his final years away from the very people he had saved. Years passed, and Scipio Africanus aged far from Rome, living in isolation at his villa in Campania. Time weighed on him, but what consumed him most was not old age, but disillusionment. He had given everything for Rome, and now he found himself forgotten by the very city he had defended. As Rome grew more powerful, his name faded into obscurity. The senators avoided speaking of him, and the people who once cheered for him no longer remembered his victories. Scipio, the man who had once commanded armies and changed the fate of a war, now lived alone, far from the world he had helped shape. In 183 BC, at the age of 60, his life came to an end. There was no celebration. No statues were erected in his honor. The Republic simply ignored the death of its greatest general. Before dying, he left one final wish: that Rome should never desecrate his tomb. And so, the greatest hero of his era departed in silence. The story of Scipio Africanus is one of the grandest and most tragic of antiquity. He defeated the greatest enemy Rome had ever faced and ensured that Rome would become the empire that dominated the world for centuries. Without his brilliance, Carthage might have won the war, and the Mediterranean would have had a different ruler. But in the end, it was not an enemy army that brought him down. His true enemy came from within the Republic itself, from those who feared his power and tried to erase him from history. Yet history did not forget him. His achievements were immortalized, forever engraved in Rome's legacy. Hannibal was one of the greatest strategists of antiquity, but Scipio was the only man who ever defeated him. Without him, Rome might never have become the empire that ruled the world. And today, his name still echoes as one of history's greatest leaders. While time has consigned those who betrayed him to oblivion, Scipio Africanus remains immortal. Centuries later, we still speak of his victories. Now, I want to hear your opinion. Do you think Scipio deserved this fate? Was he naive to trust the Senate? Or was his loyalty a sign of true greatness? Write in the comments what you think. And if you enjoyed the story and want to see more epic content like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. In the next video on the screen, we'll reveal the secrets of what Roman soldiers did after battle. You won't want to miss it.